Hello everyone. Welcome to this tutorial on Python Basics. And today we are going to discuss in this tutorial about writing your first Python code. So far, we've been discussing about how to install the Python and how to install the pip package manager. Along the way, we used a lot of Python codes as well, but we never did some serious programming, so that is exactly what we're going to do in this task. Let's concentrate on the agendas in this particular tutorial. Our first agenda is to use an IDE to write and edit code that we'll be doing frequently, and running your Python code as a standalone script. What in most cases people do is they frequently use the interpreter for trivial tasks, and that works out fine for me. Even I frequently use interpreter. But there are lots of scenarios where you actually have to write the code and store it as a script or compile it or whatever, and then use it further to execute it somewhere else. Or maybe compile native binaries out of it and then install it as a software on the system. There could be various scenarios, but for the time being, let's concentrate on writing our first code. I would like to mention a point over here. Since I'm pretty comfortable with command line editor, it would be faster if I use it. So on here, I'm going to use Vim only. If you're interested, as we have discussed a little bit about Atom Editor in our previous tutorial, you can go for it. It's the same as Vim, but because in the case of Atom Editor, you actually have to switch between command prompt and the editor, which some of you might find tedious. So it's directly your choice. You can go for Atom Editor as well, but over here I'm using Vim Editor only. Let's hit the Vim editor and let's call it our first program. So let's just write py first.py, that's how I named it, and now we hit enter. So the Vim editor took the name of the Python file as the parameter and repeated the file first. Now most of you guys might not have a very detailed idea of Python programming. But actually, you do not need to have that deep an understanding of Python programming because it's a pretty simple language. You can actually get started with lots of basic terms and handy methods. So what I'm going to do to switch code is, I'm going to write a hello world program over here, which is customary in many different languages as well, to write and start with. So let's just type print, which does make sense because we're going to actually print some value on the console, and we'll just write hello world. Okay? Now that's it. This was our just one-liner hello world Python code, and that is the specialty about Python. The code is pretty much readable, and it's much shorter. And you can do things pretty easily which actually take hours to do in languages like Java and C. So I'm going to switch to the command mode. Just for the sake of every audience, I might code my commands initially. But later on, as I'll be using Vim frequently, I won't be telling much about the specific commands, but I will be assuming that you already know about them. Anyways, I switch to the command mode and hit the W2 command with colon, which actually saves the file and quits the editor. Fine. Let's see if there's something called first.py in this directory or not. Actually, there is. There are a couple of files. The first one is firstloop.py, which we'll face later on. The second one is first.py. Okay. So before we run this file, let's do a quick Python interpreter. So the code we entered in the editor file, let's run it over here, and it produces the expected output. Now, if we need to do the same with just the file that has been created over here, so what we're going to do, since the Python environment has been set, we can access the Python interpreter from anywhere. And what we're going to do is we're going to call the Python interpreter and just pass the name of the file. So as you can see, the output is pending from the console. Now it's pretty fair and very simple and straightforward programming that we just wrote. Let's try adding some more commands over here. How about we accept some new input from the user and then do that? For the sake of newbies, I'm just writing it over here. In the later course, I'm not going to actually write it over here so that you have to be prepared for all the commands. I'll assume later on that you'll be able to catch up if I show you the entire code and not type it line by line. So let me introduce you to the raw input method. The raw input method is the same as print, but what it does is it actually accepts some input from the user. So it makes sense that a computer accepts the user's input and shows us the output. So however we display the output, but we should also know where to put the input. So I frequently use this raw input command. I displayed some value which goes inside the parenthesis as enter string. Okay. Now once we enter this particular string, for the people who don't know, strings are actually a group of characters combined together. A equals, and we stored the string into a variable called A. Now we will print this A as well after printing the hello world. Now again, the same command for saving and quitting the file. Now let's try to run this program as well. Again, the same Python, first.py, and we hit enter. As you can see, it's asking me for some input. So let's enter some. So it first printed the hello world and Yoda learning. So now you know how to create a Python code and save it in some individual file, and then run it from the Python interpreter. But it could be that in some cases you want to run the code, but after that you want to resume back to the interpreter. That is also pretty easy. You just have to take Python and then type into the command line I, and then use the file name. And then it asks me again for the input. Now after executing the code, we are now again into the interpreter. And a very special feature of this interpreter is that since we ran it with the file name, it actually contained all the variables stored as it is, as they were in the program file. So if we created the A variable, so as per my assumption, it should be there. Let's try to find it. We just type A and hit enter. Okay, there is a variable. We actually type Yoda learning, which got saved into this variable called A, and here we go. We have a full interpreter running, which took out the values of all there were in first.py. Most of you might be wondering what is a variable, and most of you might also be wondering what is a method or a function. You might not be able to follow me properly, but in our next tutorial, we are actually going to begin with the basics and discuss basic unit things and atomic things, like what is a variable, what is an integer. So wait for the next tutorial. Best of luck and thank you.